Welcome, everybody. My office is in New York City, Staten Island. Richmond County is one of the 5 boroughs in the city of New York. I'm broadcasting live here from Albany, New York, in the offices of the New York Prosecutors Training Institute. I'm here doing a presentation for them later on this afternoon, and I welcome the opportunity. Thank you, Chris, for inviting me to share 30 minutes here with the group. And it's exciting to be able to talk to a group from all over the country. The next 30 minutes or so is not going to be an exhaustive analysis or treatise on Brady, how to meet the challenge of today in a very difficult environment. We're all still reeling from the past 20 months with the pandemic. We're not out of the woods yet. Hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel. I'm an optimist, and I hope that that's the case. So I want to share with you some thoughts that I have, and perhaps raise more questions than giving you answers during the next 30 minutes. And I look forward to Cynthia's presentation after me, and then the breakout sessions where we can have lively exchanges that aren't recorded. So let's begin. Sorry? You didn't share it yet. Okay. Mm-hmm. So how can we empower ethical prosecutions? That's the title of this presentation. It sounds pretty official, but I want to get in the weeds with some of my comments. And how can we enhance our office's ethics culture? That is extremely important. We're going to talk about some structural and systemic issues and maybe some tips on how we can all learn from each other and to accomplish the goal of participating and working in an office that is known for its ethics and the ethical culture of this. And so this is an interview. Why don't we begin? A good start is an ethics statement by the district attorney. Chris, can you see that slide? An ethics statement from the district attorney. And there's this.
We can only see where it says an overview.
Okay.
There we go. Now you're on to the next slide.
Yeah. Thank you. So a good start is an ethics statement from the elected district attorney or chief prosecutor. That's in your materials. And what Christine had shared was a statement by the former district attorney of Broome County, New York, Jerry Mullen, one of the finest prosecutors I've had to be around. And he essentially made a statement or created a mission statement to the people that he served, in terms of how he's going to run his office, on how he views the importance of ethical conduct. And it's essentially a social contract that he's made, not only with the people that he serves, but with the people that work for him. And I think it's really important in any office, I suggest to you, that that kind of message has to start at the top. It doesn't end at the top, but it starts at the top. And that's why a statement from the district attorney is so important. Let me do a little shilling here. I'm a member of the New York State District Attorneys Association, also known as DASNY. And something that we updated this year in 2021, and that should be in your materials, is a handbook that Chris was a founding sister of. Many smart people then, and we've had generations of people who have worked on it and updated it that discusses a wide range of issues. It is not a treatise, it is not a horn book, but it's an overview that every prosecutor in the state of New York gets that should be a beacon in the night, an ethical guide to steer them in the right direction. And I really do believe, I've been a prosecutor for over 41 years, that the issue of ethics, trying to accomplish the right thing, is something that needs daily nurturing. The district attorney making the statement is a wonderful first step, but it's up to the supervisors in the office to water those flowers so they don't die on any given day, and constant reinforcement. I would invite you to take a look at the right thing. I'm very proud.
Tim, I'm just going to interject. that the right thing, we have distributed to many other parts of the country, and
Yeah.
we're very willing to have prosecutors copy it in its entirety, whatever is relevant. If they give some credit to the DA's Association, but other states have taken this on and copied the language, which is in simple language, and we encourage you to use it.
Absolutely, Chris. Great point. And I think as a community, prosecutors, even though we prosecute thieves, we can be thieves among ourselves in our own community, because if we see a good idea, we take it and incorporate it as our own. I don't see that as thievery. I see that as being smart. And if you see somebody whose wheel is rounder than yours, you take it upon yourself with proper credit to the author. So again, I invite you to read this at your leisure. Something else that we're doing in New York is the so-called Ethics Guidance Group. That is part of a larger group. Christine is the chair of the Best Practices Subcommittee in New York State, and along with the Ethics Committee is part of a larger group that is committed to the ethical administration of justice. What is the purpose of our Ethics Guidance Group? It's a group of volunteers, senior prosecutors, who put their cell phones on a list and are available for consultation and discussion on matters involving ethics. It's a frank conversation. It is not a recorded conversation. When we begin any call like that, we caution the person who's calling, have they run this up their own chain of command? The purpose of this group is not to be insubordinate or disrespectful to the chain of command in anyone's office. There have been occasions where people call saying, I did go up my chain and I'm extremely uncomfortable with the answer and the ethical direction that I'm being given. And under those limited circumstances, we will have a discussion with that individual to set them in the right direction. A very important way on a daily basis to be there for the membership, to be able to answer questions with respect to ethics. I will say, as a member of this group, that most people have already analyzed the issue before they call. They have an inclination and they need some affirmation that they're going in the right direction. And there are times where people think they're going in the right direction, and the group that's on the call will try to respectfully but firmly set them straight in a better direction so that they can act in an ethical manner. I will say that if anyone has a group like this or is thinking of a group like this, you have to be prepared for people to ask a question in a way where they give you limited facts and are looking for an answer that it is in a light most favorable to their situation. And we all know as lawyers and as prosecutors that good facts make good law and bad facts make bad law. So I would caution anyone who's engaged in this kind of guidance group to be cautious, to be circumspect, and to be probing with folks who call, because if they're leaving out a key ingredient, your observations, your recommendations, your suggestions or food for thought may steer them in a direction, and there's a critical element that they've missed, either intentionally omitted, that's disturbing, or they did not think that a particular fact was mission critical to the question and the answer that they were looking for, and they omitted that. We do a good amount of business. We, meaning a group of about 10 people, take calls. If it is something that's a particularly vexing issue, we will get a couple of committee members on the call to have an exchange and bounce things off of each other and the person who would call for some guidance. The issue of training. Training is important for young prosecutors when you might send them into the local court. You talk to them about how you make bail recommendations, school them and orient them on the ways of your jurisdiction. What are the statutory criteria? What policies does the elected district attorney have that serves as the guideline, the direction to line assistants who are in the lower court making recommendations with respect to the imposition of bail. So that's really important. How do you try a case? How do you conduct a pretrial hearing? How do you carry yourself in front of a judge? Those are all very important sort of introductory rookie programs that we all have in one way or another. Larger offices, I know the Manhattan DA's office, where Christine came from, would have an orientation that I think could have been as long as 2 weeks. Maybe I'm mistaken about that. Sometimes small offices that may have a half dozen prosecutors employ the see it, do it, teach it method. And it's up to every elected and their supervisory staff to figure out what works for you in your jurisdiction based on size, based on the spread of your jurisdiction, how many courts are you covering? Are you covering night courts? Are you covering courts in anterior regions of your jurisdiction? Training for rookies is important. Training for senior people is important. The issue of ethics training is something, as I suggested before, is something that needs to be done all the time. What we strive for is to create a culture of compliance, not just in response to a discrete question based on a discrete issue, but rather to have a vibe, a feeling, a culture, where the presumption is that the prosecutors are going to comply. The junior prosecutors necessarily look to the elders for guidance, and that imposes special responsibility on elders, whether they are a supervisor or not, whether they have a title or not, because younger prosecutors should be seeking guidance on issues of ethics, may not have had a fact pattern presented to them before the instant one. They should be looking to those in the office who have been around the block a little bit. Diligent maintenance of that culture is critical, mission critical. It's not something that one can do or an office can do to get our ticket punched. And we did 2 trainings, a fall training and a spring training. I think the training is important. I think the continued training is important. Maintenance, the same way that we might take our car in for a tune-up, although tune-ups don't exist anymore, but you take it in for a checkup. And I do think that it is very, very important to make sure that you maintain in between. It's like getting your teeth cleaned every 6 months. The execution of the principles taught at the training. Teaching people is important, or exposing them to ideas. I've been an adjunct professor at St. John's University for almost 20 years. I know the material that I present to them. I know that I shared thoughts and ideas and asked them questions during the 2 hours. What I'm trying to do in that academic setting is give them some tools so that they themselves have better and more acute and more substantial critical thinking, better analytical skills. So the execution of principles after training, I think, is an essential aspect of any kind of training landscape in an office. The culture of compliance, as I said before, ethical compliance, has to be conveyed from the top down. If there's either a reality or a perception that the chief prosecutor is going through the motions to mollify a constituency in your jurisdiction, assistants get that. Assistant DAs watch the moves of the upper echelon of an office, most particularly the chief prosecutor. Need to train. ADAs need to know that the front office believes in ethical compliance and is not just going through the motions. And from a supervisory point of view, we'll talk about training and supervision in a little bit more detail in a moment. We can't assume that a subordinate assistant knows what the right thing to do is unless they're properly trained. How do you drive a car? How do you parallel park in driver's ed? Well, there's a teacher, whether it's a parent, an older sibling, somebody through the high school program, or someone, a licensed vendor, who teaches you how to drive. You don't know how to parallel park until somebody teaches you how to do it. Yes, you could stumble your way to the curb by parking the car cockeyed, but someone who gives you tips, somebody who gives you benchmarks and guidelines, will teach you how to be a better parallel parker. And by example, a prosecutor who makes ethical decisions as part of the fiber of their prosecutorial being. I suggest that we, and I include myself because I am part of the larger prosecution community, to inculcate a sense of ethical muscle memory. I've told the story before, and Christine has heard this, where one of the prouder moments of my life as the father of two sons who are now 31 and 33 is my wife and I, my wife did the hard work, to try to inculcate in our sons a sense of civility, a sense of respect for other people, and that when you're going to a door in a supermarket or a Manhattan building, that you should defer to the person next to you, whether they're older or not, whether they're a man or a woman. That's a sign of respect for those around you. And one day, when my wife and I were in Manhattan going to see the Christmas tree in Rockefeller Center, when my boys were young, we were walking into a building and they each competed to hold the door open for people that were standing next to them. A proud moment in the life of a parent. The parallel is my wife and I hopefully were somewhat successful in that instance. They still didn't pick up their wet towels. So that goal of inculcating didn't work in every respect of our parenting. But there was a muscle memory that we created by repeated reinforcement, or at least I hope we did. We want to train so that the ethical thing to do is reflexive and not something that people will deliberate over for days and days. Thinking is good, but let's face it, we're in a fast-paced business, and sometimes you make mistakes when you move quickly. So if you've got a good architectural structure to your sense of ethics, you want to do the right thing. That is your goal. And you feel that that commitment to ethical compliance is coming from the top, from the chief prosecutor on down. That reflex is a little bit easier to accomplish. We shouldn't be shocked when something winds up hitting the fan, so to speak, if assistants were not consistently trained. That is a responsibility, I think, of every elder in an office to make sure that they're giving proper guidance, ethical guidance. You shoot straight. You be honest with the court. You don't hide the ball. Avoid the document dump. You know, in this day and age, it could be paper or it could be records, technology records, cell phone, it could be DNA evidence, et cetera, et cetera. We all know what the document dump is. You give a carton of materials, perhaps in paper form or on a CD, or if you're transmitting it electronically through OneDrive, and there is a piece of information in there that you truly believe is Brady material. Query, are you doing the right thing by providing the document dump in whatever format and not identifying some aspect of thousands of pages of information? Draw the counsel's attention to that and draw the court's attention to that. Might that hurt your case? Maybe. Might that sound the death knell for the case in some cases? Perhaps. But if you use that standard as to whether or not you're going to disclose and identify something in a mountain of information as Brady material, you're on a slippery slope, in my opinion. No truth bending. When we're talking about ethics, a culture in the office, straight shooter, tell the truth. Yes, we're lawyers, and we oftentimes cobble together arguments and positions in a light most favorable to the prosecution. That's the art of advocacy. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about sins of omission. I'm talking about sins of commission. And being forthright is the coin of the realm in any well-run prosecutor's office. Avoid hiding the ball. I had an instance about a year ago during the pandemic where I felt that the assistant was hiding the ball from me, and I'm the chief assistant. And I put that person through the ringer and said, if you're doing that for me and I'm on your team, what are you doing and what are you hiding from defense counsel and the court? That person left my office, I think, somewhat chastened and understood how serious I was about this. We can give no quarter or a wide berth to someone whose intentions are to hide the proverbial ball, and then avoid gamesmanship. Okay, the art of lawyering, it's an adversarial profession. We know that. It's not for the weak of heart. It is not for the thin-skinned, but avoid the gamesmanship, because that, I think, you're on the tip of the slope and could easily slide down it when it comes to more serious ethical issues. Don't delegate the Brady review of your folder to a paralegal. That's real tempting, real tempting. And if you have a really dynamite paralegal support person who's a dynamo for you, who's really rocking and rolling, supporting you, there's a temptation, well, she probably knows the law better than I do, or she's got more time. Somebody doing a first look, a junior colleague, a second seat, or a support person, I'm not sure there's anything wrong with that. But ultimately, if your name is on the docket as representing, in my case, the people of the state of New York, I submit to you, and indeed this decisional law in New York, that that is a non-delegable function. If I'm representing that there's no Brady material. And there can be consequences, as we all know, not just to the case, but also with respect to the license of the assistant DA. Don't ask the investigator, hey, you got any Brady material in your file? Same point as I just made a moment ago. I heard something very insightful from the Honorable Pierre Laval from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, a former chief assistant DA in Chris's old office, the Manhattan DA's office. And he said at an event that prosecutors should use, quote, concealed skepticism when interviewing police officers. You may not like where the conversation is going. You may have suspicions about a police officer, but anybody has been in intake for a week understands that police officers don't respond to a prosecutor who asks questions with dripping sarcasm. And Judge Laval, I think, just encapsulated this sense of how to approach police officers, not to try to play games with them, not to try to pull the wool over their eyes, but conceal your skepticism. And chances are, it's not a guarantee, that you will get more information from that police officer. And why is that so important? Well, we know that what the police know, we, the prosecution, are on constructive notice of. And if the police officer has exculpatory information that he may understand and identify but doesn't want to give it up because it hurts the case, or the police officer who went to the police academy, not law school, doesn't understand the concept of Brady the way it's being interpreted today and with respect to the contextual analysis of Brady material. So here are some really simple things. Make sure the prosecution folder is complete. You didn't need Tim Koller to tell you that, but it's important. Carefully review the prosecution folder. It's great if the folder is complete, but if you don't look at it, that defeats the purpose of gathering all relevant materials. Continually review the prosecution case folder. Why is that important? Because a document or a piece of information that was put in the week after the indictment may standing alone be a somewhat benign assertion of facts that has not assumed the essence of Brady material. However, case files are normally dynamic. They're like a snowball rolling down the hill. They acquire more substance from the top to the bottom of the snow-laden hill. And something that's inserted in the folder later may make that police report the week after the indictment exculpatory in nature. Context, context, context. So Brady,
you have 5 minutes remaining.
Okay, Brady and its evolving interpretation. Brady material is often defined in the context of other evidence, as I said. When we're thinking about whether or not something is Brady material, there was the former district attorney of Erie County, who's now a judge, Frank Sedita, said that he employed the food on the floor for more than 5 seconds rule. when he was a server in a restaurant. If something fell off the serving plate before he gave it to the diner, if it was 5 seconds or less, he'd put it back on the plate and serve it. It's kind of disturbing to think about that. And I had a senior person echoing Frank Sedita's rule of thumb that if you have to think about whether something is Brady for more than 5 seconds, it probably is, and you probably should disclose it. So evidence is rarely unidimensional. Context is key. And that's why the file has to be complete. And that's why the file has to be reviewed continuously. I'm not going to go through all of these one by one because all of you understand, and I just put this here for reinforcement, where Brady can be found. The whole advent of technology with license plate readers, the internet, cell phones, body-worn camera, but old school stuff like conversations with witnesses and investigators and witness statements. Identification procedures. Someone who didn't identify a suspect or waffled or said, I think, or I'm pretty sure it's number 10, you have to evaluate that to see whether it hits the threshold of Brady. And if it's 6 seconds and you're still thinking about it, maybe you know what the answer is in terms of disclosure. And this information here, GPS. Why is GPS? I'll just point out, I think you already know that if there's a GPS device on a suspect or an archival trail on their phone that provides them with an alibi, that's quite significant. It's exculpatory of their guilt, and it has to be disclosed. So I'll just run through these in the interest of time. Jail calls. What is the defendant saying on the jail call? What is somebody else talking to the detainee about? Control calls by the victim, an undercover's control call with the defendant. Voicemails on the victim's message machine. A victim who calls on the machine and says something, I can't be sure. We constantly have to review the file. A tip line, an anonymous tip line, archival information on cell phones. And Brady can be found just about anywhere. Again, this is an overview. It is not a microscopic analysis of Brady material and how we can encourage an ethical compliance in our office. We have to be situationally aware. We have to pay attention. Most accidents on the roads are due to driver inattention, not because driver A intentionally wanted to rear end driver B. Be vigilant. Employ the 540 look. This was something when I was at the New York City Police Department Academy and they were training on officer safety. And they said that you have to do when you come into a potentially dangerous situation, you have to look around you 360. You also have to look above you to make sure that someone is not going to throw something that can hurt you off a rooftop of a building. And you also have to look at your feet to see whether there's somebody crouched behind a garbage can and they could cause harm to the officer. It's sort of like a prosecutor reviewing the file for Brady material. To be an ethical prosecutor, you have to eyes in the back of your head. It's kind of like raising 2 teenage boys in some respects. In your materials, Chris has provided
you have 1 minute left.
Case review questions. I strongly encourage to use those. And as Christine had said before, if you want them, you got them with proper attribution to the DASNY Best Practices Committee. Issues of supervision. Beware of the gunslinger ADA, the senior ADA who hasn't come to grip with the fact that things are changing. Be aware of the younger ADA or the senior ADA who resist change. We all know what the unmotivated ADA is, who can get themselves into trouble without even knowing it. Part of cultural compliance is identifying these issues, identifying these people and trying to train them. Beware of the assistant who engage in willful blindness or studied ignorance when reviewing, or sometimes not reviewing, the evidence in a case. Do line prosecutors in your office feel like they're working in a gotcha environment? Are subordinate ADAs encouraged to come to their supervisors with questions regarding ethical issues, even dumb ones? Do supervisors put a puss on? I just need 30 seconds. Do supervisors put a puss on when they're asked an ethical question at an inconvenient time, which may be 5 o'clock on a lovely Friday afternoon in August? Do supervisors refrain from huffing and puffing when an assistant does come to them with an ethical problem? Is it the sense in an office that ethics is only the concern of the front office? We're toiling in the vineyard as the line prosecutors. That's a front office issue. Or does it permeate the ethos of the office? Avoid creating a win or loss environment. Because if there is a win-win-win environment, trust me, after 41 years, people will cut corners, and some of those corners are going to be in the issues of ethics. And you don't want to see that happen. With respect to change, as I close, Charles Darwin did not talk about survival of the fittest. He said it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. That may apply to me after 41 years. I'm not the most intelligent. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. So we have to be situationally aware. We have to train. We understand that we have human beings who are pressed, large expectations, oftentimes of young people or senior prosecutors who may be somewhat bored, who don't like the changes that are afoot. And it's the responsibility, I think, of the leaders, the decision makers in an office, to make sure that they identify those issues and accomplish that ethos of an ethically compliant prosecutor's office.